I was sitting at my daughter's engagement dinner when my future son-in-law leaned toward his brother and spoke in German, slow, confident, and cruel. He called me a decorative old wallet. He said I'd be useful once I sign everything. The table laughed politely, not understanding a word, but I did. Every single word. So I smiled, lifted my glass, and said nothing. Because in that moment, I realized something far more dangerous than his insults. This wasn't just disrespect. This was a plan. If you've ever been underestimated by your own family, I'd love to hear your story. Where are you watching from, and what time is it there right now? And if this moment already gave you chills, don't forget to like and subscribe, because what happened next changed everything. My name is Eva Collins. And for most of my life, I learned the quiet power of being underestimated. At 62, I had grown used to people seeing what they wanted to see: a polite widow, a gentle mother, a woman who smiled more than she spoke. It was easier that way. Safer, too. After my husband, Thomas Collins, passed away 5 years ago, I found myself stepping into rooms where people spoke to me with softened voices and lowered expectations, as if grief had somehow made me fragile. I never corrected them. Thomas and I had built our company together from nothing, just a rented warehouse space near the docks and a secondhand machine that jammed more often than it worked. Over 30 years, we turned that into a thriving specialty packaging business that served clients across the East Coast. After he died, I didn't sell it. I didn't step away. I stayed. I learned every corner of it more deeply than ever before. But outside of work, I chose to become smaller, especially for my daughter, Lily. Lily was my only child, my heart walking around outside my body. She'd always been soft where I was sharp, trusting where I was cautious. Even as a little girl, she believed the best in people, even when they hadn't earned it yet. When she told me she had met someone different, someone kind and driven, I wanted to believe her. That someone was Ryan Keller. Ryan had a way of entering a room like he already belonged there. He was confident without appearing arrogant, at least on the surface. He laughed easily, shook hands firmly, and looked people directly in the eye when he spoke. The first time I met him, he brought flowers. Not something overly extravagant, just a thoughtful arrangement in soft whites and greens. "Mrs. Collins," he said warmly, "I've heard so much about you." And I remember thinking, that's interesting. From whom Lily watched me closely that evening, searching my face for approval. I gave it to her. Not because I fully trusted him, but because I trusted her heart. Still, there were moments. Small ones. The kind that slipped past you at first. Ryan had an odd habit of redirecting conversations whenever finances came up. If I asked Lily about her plans after the wedding, where they might live, how they intended to manage expenses, Ryan would smoothly interject with something charming or humorous, steering us into safer territory. "Let's not bore Eva with spreadsheets tonight," he'd say with a grin. "We should be celebrating." At the time, it seemed harmless. Now I wasn't so sure. There were other things, too. He asked questions, very specific ones, but always wrapped in casual curiosity. "How complicated is it to run a company like yours? Do you handle everything yourself?" "Is it stressful managing long-term assets alone?" I answered lightly, never offering more than necessary. But I noticed how carefully he listened, how his eyes didn't drift the way most people's did when conversations turned technical. He absorbed details, filed them away. And then there was his brother Eric. Eric Keller had arrived from Germany just a few months before the engagement. He was quieter than Ryan, more reserved, but there was something sharp about him, observant, calculating in a way that made me uneasy without knowing why. The two of them slipped into German often. At first, I paid it no mind. After all, it was natural for siblings to fall back into their native language. Lily would laugh awkwardly sometimes, asking them to switch back to English, but they usually waved it off with an apology and a joke. "It's just habit," Ryan would say. And I would nod, smile, pretend. Because here is the truth I never shared, not with Lily, not with anyone in that room. German was once the language of my youth, before I married Thomas, before I became Eva Collins, the business owner, the mother, the widow. I was simply Eva Mercer, a young woman who left the United States with a scholarship and a suitcase, chasing a version of herself she hadn't met yet. I studied in Zurich, first finance and international trade, but it was in Munich where I truly learned to live. I worked for a logistics firm there for several years, negotiating contracts, managing clients, navigating conversations where a single word spoken correctly or incorrectly could shift everything. Language wasn't just communication, it was power. And I became fluent not just in vocabulary, but in tone, in implication in what people said when they thought you weren't really listening. When I returned to the U.S. to build a life with Thomas, I folded that part of myself away. Not deliberately, but naturally. Life moved forward. English became enough. Until now. Until that dinner. Until Ryan leaned in and let his real voice slip out, thinking no one at the table could understand him. But I did. And once you hear someone speak about you without their mask on, you can never unhear it. That night after the engagement dinner ended, I went home alone. The house felt quieter than usual. Lily had stayed out late with Ryan celebrating. I didn't blame her. She was in love. She deserved to feel that joy even if I was beginning to question the man standing beside her. I set my keys down on the hallway table and stood there for a long moment staring at nothing in particular. Then I walked into my study. It was the one room in the house that hadn't changed since Thomas passed. His books were still lined neatly on the shelves. His chair sat angled slightly toward the window, just the way he liked it. I sat at my desk and opened the top drawer. Inside were folders carefully organized, labeled in my handwriting. Estate documents, trust structures, business agreements. Years of planning, of protecting, of ensuring that everything we built would one day pass safely to Lily. My fingers rested on the edge of one folder. Useful once she signs everything. Ryan's voice echoed in my mind, sharp and certain. What exactly did he think I was going to sign? And how much did he already know I hadn't shared details with Lily beyond what was necessary? Not because I didn't trust her, but because I wanted her to live her life without feeling weighed down by responsibility too soon. But had she shared more than I realized, or had Ryan found another way in? A slow, steady unease settled into my chest. Not panic, not yet. Something colder, more precise. I pulled the folder out and placed it on the desk in front of me. Then I reached for another. If there was one thing I had learned over the years, both in business and in life, it was this. When something doesn't feel right, no, it usually isn't. And when someone shows you who they are, especially when they think you don't understand, you pay attention. That night, I didn't cry. I didn't call Lily. I didn't confront anyone. Instead, I did what I had always done best. I started paying very, very close attention. Because whatever Ryan Keller thought this was, he had just made one critical mistake. He assumed I was a woman who didn't understand. And he couldn't have been more wrong. Once you start noticing something, truly noticing it, you can't go back to the comfort of ignorance. The next few days, I didn't confront Ryan. I didn't even change how I spoke to him. If anything, I became warmer, softer, the kind of mother-in-law he clearly believed me to be. And in doing so, I began to see everything. It started with the smallest details. At Sunday brunch, Lily mentioned they were looking at apartments closer to the city. I asked casually what their budget might be. Before Lily could answer, Ryan laughed lightly and reached for the coffee pot. "We're still figuring that out," he said smoothly. "No need to lock anything in yet." His tone was relaxed. His smile was easy, but his eyes flicked toward Lily just for a second. A signal. She hesitated, then nodded as if she had almost said something she wasn't supposed to. I smiled and let it go. But inside, I marked it. Later that same morning, Eric joined us at the table. He greeted me politely, his expression unreadable as always. Ryan leaned toward him, and within seconds they slipped into German again. "Sie fragt schon wieder nach Zahlen," Eric muttered under his breath. "She's asking about numbers again." Ryan chuckled quietly. "Lass sie. Sie versteht sowieso nichts davon." Let her, she doesn't understand any of it anyway. I felt something tighten in my chest, but I didn't react. I buttered my toast, took a sip of tea, and listened. "Nach der Hochzeit wird alles einfacher," Ryan continued. "After the wedding, everything will be easier." Eric gave a small approving nod. I didn't need them to say more. The pattern was beginning to form. Over the following week, I replayed every interaction I had ever had with Ryan, and the more I thought about it, the clearer it became. This wasn't spontaneous behavior. It was strategy. He never pushed too hard in front of me, never asked directly for anything that could be traced back as manipulation. Everything he did was filtered through Lily. Always Lily. Lily was thinking. Lily felt it might be a good idea if he positioned himself behind her, using her trust as a shield. And Lily, my sweet, trusting daughter, believed she was making these decisions herself. That realization hurt more than anything he had said in German, because it meant this wasn't just about me. It was about her. One afternoon, Lily stopped by my house unexpectedly. She looked tired, not unhappy exactly, but stretched thin. "Mom," she said as she stepped inside, "do you ever feel like planning a wedding turns everything into a negotiation?" I gave her a gentle smile. "Only if you're planning it with the wrong person." She laughed, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. We sat in the kitchen sunlight spilling across the counter as she absent-mindedly stirred her coffee. "Ryan just wants things to be fair," she said after a moment. "Fair how I asked carefully." She hesitated, then shrugged. "You know, balanced, like making sure we're both protected in the future." There it was again, language that didn't sound like hers. Protected from what I asked. She frowned slightly as if the question itself confused her. "I don't know, just, life." I nodded slowly, keeping my voice calm. "And how does Ryan suggest you do that?" She looked down at her cup. "He just thinks it would be smart if we streamlined things a bit, so everything isn't so complicated later. Streamlined, complicated." These weren't Lily's words. They were his. I reached across the table and gently placed my hand over hers. "Sweetheart," I said softly, "has Ryan been asking you questions about my finances?" Her head snapped up. "What no, Mom? Why would you even think that? Too fast, too defensive." I held her gaze, not accusing, just present. Because I said gently, "He seems very interested in things most people wouldn't be." She pulled her hand back, her expression tightening. "He's just trying to understand the family he's marrying into," she said. "That's not a crime." "No," I agreed quietly. "It isn't." But something in the room had shifted. Lily stood up abruptly, grabbing her bag. "I think you're overthinking this," she said. "Ryan's not like that." I didn't stop her. I didn't argue, because pushing her now would only drive her further toward him, and that was exactly what he would want. That evening, I attended a small gathering at a friend's home, a casual event, nothing formal. Ryan and Eric were there, along with a few others from their circle. I arrived a little later than planned, and for the first time, I didn't announce myself. The front door had been left slightly open, music drifting out into the quiet street. I stepped inside softly, my heels making almost no sound against the hardwood floor. Voices carried from the living room. Ryan's voice, sharp, different. "Sie denkt wirklich, sie hat die Kontrolle," he was saying. "She really thinks she's in control." Eric laughed. "Das macht es einfacher." That makes it easier. I stopped just short of the doorway, my breath held. Ryan continued his tone colder than I had ever heard it in English. Claire he caught himself, then corrected Lily as emotional. "Man muss nur wissen wann man druckt. Lily is emotional. You just have to know when to push." My stomach dropped. Eric leaned back, clearly amused. "Und die Mutter." And the mother, Ryan, didn't hesitate. "Die ist irrelevant, sobald die Unterlagen unterschrieben sind, spielt sie keine Rolle mehr." She's irrelevant. Once the documents are signed, she won't matter anymore. For a moment, the room felt like it tilted. Irrelevant. I had built everything in Lily's life, protected it, sacrificed for it, and to him, I was just an obstacle waiting to disappear. I stepped back silently before they could see me, took a slow breath, then another. When I finally walked into the living room a few seconds later, I made sure my expression was exactly what they expected. Warm, polite, unaware. Eva Ryan said, his entire demeanor shifting instantly as he stood to greet me. "We didn't hear you come in." "I didn't want to interrupt," I replied with a gentle smile. Eric nodded politely, his face already composed again, masks back in place. If I had any doubt before, it was gone now. This wasn't curiosity. This wasn't misunderstanding. This was deliberate, calculated, and it was moving faster than I'd realized. That night, as I drove home, the silence in the car felt heavy but not confusing. Clear, focused. Ryan thought he understood the situation. He thought I was passive, predictable, easy to manage, but he had never met the version of me that negotiated contracts in rooms full of men who underestimated me. He had never seen what happened when I stopped playing along, and most importantly, he had no idea I was listening. As I pulled into my driveway, I turned off the engine and sat there for a moment staring at the dark outline of my home. Then I reached for my phone. There was only one person I needed to speak to now, because this was no longer about suspicion. This was no longer about instinct. This was about proof. And if Ryan Keller wanted to turn my life into a strategy, then he had just stepped into a game he didn't understand. The next morning, I woke up with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. Not the soft clarity of acceptance, not the fragile clarity that comes after grief. This was something sharper, deliberate. I made coffee the way Thomas used to strong, almost too bitter, and carried it into my study. The folders were still laid out across my desk from the night before, exactly where I had left them. For a long moment I didn't sit. I just stood there looking at everything we had built, every contract, every agreement, every carefully structured protection designed to ensure that Lily would never have to struggle the way we once did. And now, all of it was being quietly studied, measured and positioned by someone who had never earned the right to touch it. Ryan hadn't just insulted me, he had studied me, and that was the part that unsettled me most. I finally sat down and opened the first folder. Trust agreements, everything was intact. No unauthorized signatures, no missing pages. No obvious tampering, but that didn't mean there hadn't been access. I pulled out another file summaries I had once shown Lily in broad terms, simplified versions designed to help her understand the structure without overwhelming her. That was the vulnerability, not the documents themselves, but the interpretation of them. Ryan didn't need original copies. He just needed enough information to predict my next move, and from what I had heard, he already thought he could. I leaned back in my chair, my mind replaying his words from the night before. Once the documents are signed, she won't matter anymore. What documents exactly? Which ones did he think he was so close to? That was when something clicked. Not a full answer, but a direction. I reached for my phone. "Margaret," I said when she picked up, "I need to see you today." Margaret Hayes had been my attorney for nearly 2 decades. She was not the kind of lawyer who wasted words or time. Tall, composed. With silver hair she never bothered to dye, Margaret had built her reputation on precision. People underestimated her, too. They always regretted it. Her office overlooked the harbor sunlight reflecting off the water in long, shifting lines as I sat across from her desk. She didn't interrupt as I spoke, not once. I told her everything. The dinner, the German conversations, the specific phrases Ryan had used, the references to document signatures leverage. By the time I finished, the room felt very still. Margaret folded her hands slowly. "And you're absolutely certain about the translation?" she asked. I met her gaze evenly. Every word. She nodded once. "Then this isn't speculation," she said. "This is intent." The words settled heavily between us. Intent. Not curiosity, not misunderstanding, deliberate planning. Margaret stood and walked toward the window, her expression thoughtful. "Let's start with the basics," she said. "What has your daughter had access to?" "High-level summaries," I replied. "Nothing actionable. Nothing that could be used independently. And copies, I don't believe," so I said. Then paused. "But I can't be certain." Margaret turned back to me. "That uncertainty is where your risk lives." I exhaled slowly. I know. She returned to her desk and opened a legal pad, jotting down a few notes. "If he's referencing documents and signatures," she continued, "then he's either planning to influence your daughter into requesting changes, or he believes those changes are already in motion." I felt a chill run through me. "He mentioned a trust," I said quietly, "and timing it after the wedding." Margaret's pen stopped. "That's not random language," she said. "That suggests he's thinking in terms of access points, moments when legal or financial structures are most vulnerable to emotional pressure." Meaning I asked. "Meaning," she said calmly, "he's waiting for a moment when your daughter feels secure enough in the marriage and dependent enough emotionally to agree to something she wouldn't normally question." The words landed harder than anything else she had said so far, because they weren't just about me. They were about Lily. She trusts him. I said, my voice quieter now. Margaret's expression softened just slightly. That's exactly why this works, she said. Silence filled the room again. Then she leaned forward. So we don't confront him. I looked up. What not yet, she clarified. If you confront him now, he'll retreat. He'll adjust. He'll become more careful. And if I don't, her eyes sharpened. He'll keep moving forward, exactly as he's been planning. I understood immediately. You want him to show us everything. I want him to believe he's succeeding, she said. A slow, steady realization spread through me. This wasn't just about defense anymore. This was strategy, how I asked. Margaret tapped her pen lightly against the desk. We create a controlled leak, she said. Something specific, something believable, something only one channel can carry. My mind moved quickly now, connecting pieces. You mean, we give him information? Not real information, she corrected. Test information, a decoy. She nodded. If he acts on it, we know exactly where it came from and what he intends to do with it. I felt something shift inside me then. The fear was still there, but it was no longer in control. What kind of information, I asked. Margaret's lips curved slightly, not a smile, but something close, something he can't resist. That afternoon, I drove home with a different kind of weight on my shoulders. Not confusion, not helplessness, purpose. For the first time since that engagement dinner, I wasn't just reacting to Ryan's behavior. I was preparing for it. As I pulled into my driveway, I saw Lily's car already parked outside. My chest tightened. I hadn't expected her. For a brief moment, I considered turning around, giving myself more time, more space to think. But then I remembered what Margaret had said. If Ryan was moving forward, then time wasn't something I had. I stepped out of the car and walked toward the front door. Lily was inside, standing in the kitchen, her arms folded tightly across her chest. She looked up as I entered. "Mom," she said, her voice tense. "We need to talk." "So it begins," I thought. I set my bag down slowly. "Of course," I said gently. "What's on your mind?" She hesitated, then took a breath. "Ryan thinks maybe it would be a good idea if we started having more open conversations about the future." There it was, right on schedule. I kept my expression calm. "That sounds reasonable," I said. Relief flickered across her face. "He just doesn't want things to get complicated later," she added, "especially with everything you've built." I nodded slowly, as if considering it. "And what exactly does he suggest?" I asked. She shifted slightly, clearly uncomfortable now. "Well, nothing specific yet," she said. "Just maybe reviewing things together, making sure we all understand the structure. Together. All of us, including him." I could almost hear Margaret's voice in my head, something he can't resist. I stepped closer to Lily and placed a gentle hand on her arm. "Sweetheart," I said softly, "if it gives you peace of mind, I'd be happy to walk you through everything." Her shoulders relaxed immediately. "Really, of course," I said with a warm smile. Then just as casually, I added, "I've actually been thinking about simplifying a few things myself." Her eyes lit up. "See?" she said quickly. "That's exactly what Ryan was saying." I smiled again. "Yes," I said quietly. "I'm sure it is." And in that moment, I knew Ryan Keller had just taken the first step into a trap he didn't even know existed. Lily stayed longer than usual that afternoon. At first, our conversation felt almost normal. We sat at the kitchen island, the late sunlight spilling across the marble surface, casting soft shadows between us. She stirred her coffee absent-mindedly, her fingers tapping lightly against the ceramic cup in a rhythm that told me more than her words ever could. She was nervous, not guilty, not calculating, just caught in something she didn't fully understand. That distinction mattered. So she said, carefully glancing up at me, "What did you mean about simplifying things?" I leaned back slightly, adopting the same calm, measured tone I had used in boardrooms for years. "Well, I said I've been reviewing some of the long-term structures your father and I set up. Some of them are more complex than they need to be now." That much was true, just not in the way she thought. Lily nodded slowly, absorbing it. Ryan was saying something similar, she replied. That sometimes people hold on to complicated systems because they're used to them, not because they're still necessary. "Of course he did," I smiled faintly. "And what do you think I asked?" She hesitated. "I think—" She started, then paused, choosing her words carefully. I think he just wants us to be on the same page, as a family, as a family. The phrase sounded warm, comforting, but underneath it I could hear the structure of something else, something strategic, something rehearsed, and being on the same page, I said gently, means what exactly? Lily exhaled, clearly relieved that I wasn't pushing back. Just transparency, she said, understanding how everything works. So there are no surprises later, no surprises. I held her gaze for a moment longer than usual. Surprises can be dangerous, I agreed softly. She nodded, missing the weight behind my words. For a brief second, I saw the little girl she used to be, the one who would sit at this same counter, swinging her legs and asking endless questions about the world, trusting that every answer she received was true. That innocence was still there. Ryan had simply learned how to speak around it. Has Ryan asked you to look at specific documents? I asked after a moment. Lily's fingers stilled against her cup. Not exactly, she said, just general things. What kind of general things? She shifted in her seat, her shoulders tightening slightly. Mom, she said, a hint of frustration creeping into her voice, why does this feel like an interrogation? I softened immediately. It's not, I said gently. I'm just trying to understand where you are in all of this. She looked at me for a long moment. Then slowly, her posture relaxed. I showed him some summaries, she admitted. There it was. How detailed, I asked. Not very, she said quickly, just basic outlines, the trust structure, the business ownership. Nothing sensitive. Nothing sensitive. I kept my expression neutral even as my mind began to map out the implications. Summaries were enough. In the right hands, summaries could be more than enough. Did he ask you to? I asked. Lily hesitated again, then nodded. He just wanted to understand, she said. He said it would help him feel more secure about our future. Secure, another carefully chosen word. And how did you feel about that? I asked quietly. She looked down at her hands. I didn't think it was a big deal, she said. I mean, we're getting married. Isn't that what people do? Share things, build something together? My heart ached for her in that moment, because she wasn't wrong, not in the way she understood it. But Ryan wasn't building, he was positioning. There's a difference, I said gently, between sharing a life and handing someone the blueprint before they've earned your trust. She looked up sharply. You don't trust him, she said. It wasn't a question. I held her gaze. I trust you, I said. That's not the same thing, she replied, her voice tightening. No, I agreed, it isn't. The silence that followed felt heavier than anything we had said out loud. Lily stood abruptly, pacing a few steps across the kitchen before turning back to face me. You've never liked him, she said. Not really. That's not true, I replied calmly. Then what is this, she pressed? Because it feels like you're looking for something wrong. I stood as well, keeping my movements slow, non-threatening. I'm not looking for something wrong, I said quietly. I'm noticing what's already there. She shook her head, frustration rising. You're overthinking this, she said. Ryan is not some kind of schemer, Mom. He loves me. Love. The word hung in the air between us. Powerful, dangerous. I'm sure he believes that, I said carefully. Her eyes flashed. What does that mean? It means, I said, choosing each word with precision, that people can love someone and still make choices that benefit themselves first. That's not him, she insisted. Then help me understand him, I replied gently. She faltered, just for a second, and in that second I saw it. Doubt, small, fragile. But there. Why does he need to understand my finances so thoroughly, I asked softly. Why now? She didn't answer immediately. Because she didn't have one. He just wants to be prepared, she said. Finally, though her voice lacked the conviction it had moments ago, for what I asked. Another silence, longer this time. He said, she began slowly, that sometimes families get complicated when money isn't clearly defined. I nodded. That's true, I said. Her shoulders relaxed slightly, but usually I continued. That's when the complications already exist. Her expression shifted. Confusion, uncertainty. Are you saying we're complicated, she asked. I'm saying, I replied gently, that we weren't until recently. That landed. I saw it in the way her eyes softened, the way her defenses wavered, because deep down she knew. Things had changed. Not dramatically, not obviously, but enough. Mom, she said quietly, I just want everything to be okay. I stepped closer, placing my hands lightly on her arms. "I know," I said softly, "and it will be." She searched my face, looking for reassurance. I gave it to her, not as a lie, but as a promise I intended to keep no matter what it took. "Trust me," I said. She nodded slowly. "I do." And that more than anything solidified what I had already begun to understand. Lily wasn't my opponent. She wasn't even fully aware of the game. She was the ground Ryan was trying to stand on. After she left, I didn't move for a long time. I stood in the quiet kitchen, replaying every word, every hesitation, every flicker of doubt in her eyes. Then I walked back into my study. The folders were still there, waiting. I picked one up, one of the simplified summaries Lily had likely shared, and I saw it differently now. Not as a document, but as an entry point, a map Ryan had been studying, believing it would lead him exactly where he wanted to go. A slow, steady resolve settled into me. He thought he understood the structure. He thought he could predict my decisions. He thought Lily would carry him through the rest. But he was working with incomplete information, and very soon, that would become his biggest weakness. I reached for my phone and dialed Margaret. "It's confirmed," I said when she answered. "He's getting information through Lily." There was a brief pause. Then Margaret's voice came through calm and precise. "Good," she said. "Good. Not because of what it meant, but because of what it allowed us to do next." I looked down at the documents spread across my desk, then back out toward the quiet house. "He's closer than I thought," I said. Margaret didn't hesitate. "Then it's time," she replied, to give him something to chase. I smiled faintly, not out of satisfaction, but out of clarity, because for the first time since this began, I wasn't just protecting what was mine. I was guiding exactly what Ryan would see next, and he would never realize. He was following a path I had already rewritten. The next step required something I hadn't allowed myself to feel yet: control. Not the illusion of it, the quiet, steady kind that comes from understanding the board better than the person sitting across from you. By the time I arrived at Margaret Hayes' office the following morning, I had already decided something important. I wasn't going to wait for Ryan to make his move. I was going to make it for him. Margaret was reviewing documents when I walked in. She didn't look up immediately, just gestured for me to sit. "You look different," she said after a moment. "Do I?" I replied, setting my bag down. "Yes," she said, finally lifting her eyes to meet mine. "You've stopped reacting." I considered that. She wasn't wrong. "I've started understanding," I said instead. A faint, approving nod. "Good," she replied. "That's where the advantage begins." I took a seat across from her desk and leaned forward slightly. "He's getting information through Lily," I said, "summaries. Structural outlines. Enough to piece things together." Margaret didn't seem surprised. "That was the most likely channel," she said calmly, "which means we can control it." "Walk me through it," I said. She slid a legal pad toward herself and began outlining a structure, not in legal jargon, but in strategy. "We don't block the flow of information," she said. "We redirect it. How we give Lily something real enough to believe," she continued, "but altered just enough that if it reaches Ryan, it leads him to the wrong conclusion." "A decoy," I said. "Exactly." I exhaled slowly. "And what kind of conclusion do we want him to reach?" Margaret's expression sharpened. "One that makes him act." I felt a flicker of something, anticipation maybe. "Go on." She tapped her pen lightly against the desk. "Right now, he's circling," she said, "gathering information, testing boundaries, waiting for the right moment to push." I nodded. "He's patient." "Yes," she agreed, "which means we need to give him a reason not to be." That landed immediately. "If he believes an opportunity is about to disappear," I said slowly, "he'll move faster." "And less carefully," she added. I leaned back slightly, the pieces beginning to align. "What's the opportunity?" I asked. Margaret didn't hesitate. "A partial transfer," she said, "to Lily and Ryan." She nodded. "Something tied to a tangible asset," she continued. "Not abstract wealth, something concrete, something he can visualize controlling." My mind moved quickly through possibilities. "Commercial property," I said. Margaret's lips curved slightly. "Exactly." I stood and walked toward the window, looking out over the harbor. The idea was simple, too simple, which meant it would work. "He thinks in leverage," I said, "control, positioning, and ownership," Margaret added. "Specifically shared ownership that can later be influenced." I turned back to face her. So we give him that, I said. On paper, she corrected. Not in reality. I nodded slowly. And we make sure the information only travels one way. Through Lily, she confirmed. A silence settled between us. Not uncertain, focused. There was one thing left. And what exactly are we testing? I asked. Margaret met my gaze directly. Whether he acts on it, she said. And if he does, her voice was calm. Then we'll know exactly how far he's willing to go. That afternoon, I invited Lily over again. This time I was ready. She arrived quickly, too quickly. That told me Ryan had likely encouraged her to follow up. Good, let him lean in. We sat in the living room this time, documents neatly arranged on the coffee table between us. Not the real ones, the decoy. Carefully constructed summaries prepared with Margaret's precision, accurate enough to be believable, altered just enough to mislead. I've been thinking about what you said, I began gently. Lily looked relieved immediately. Really, she said. I nodded. I realized something, I continued. Your father and I built everything with the future in mind, but we never really simplified what that future looks like for you. Her expression softened. That's exactly what I meant, she said. It shouldn't be confusing. It doesn't have to be, I agreed. I slid one of the documents toward her. This, I said, is something I've been considering. She picked it up, her eyes scanning quickly. A commercial property, she asked. Yes, I said. A distribution facility we've held for years. That one near Hartford, she asked. I nodded. It's stable, I said. Predictable income, low volatility. Her eyes moved across the page, absorbing the structure. And you'd transfer part of it, she asked. Eventually, I said carefully, after the wedding. There it was. Timing, intentional. Planted. She looked up at me, her expression brightening in a way that made my chest tighten. Mom, that's... she started, then stopped, clearly emotional. I just want you to feel secure, I said softly, and I meant it, just not in the way she thought. This would mean Ryan and I, she began. It would mean, I said gently, that you both have something stable to build on. She nodded quickly. Yes, that makes sense. Of course it did, because it was designed to. Do you think Ryan would understand something like this? I asked casually. She smiled. He'd love this, she said without hesitation. Love. Not appreciation, not gratitude, love. I filed that away. Then maybe, I said lightly, you can walk him through it. Her eyes lit up. I will, she said immediately. Exactly as expected. That evening, I sat in my study, the house quiet around me. Waiting. It didn't take long. The call came from Margaret just after 8:30. They moved faster than I expected, she said without preamble. I leaned forward slightly. What happened? There was an inquiry, she said, through a third-party financial contact, referencing a partial ownership structure in a commercial distribution asset. My pulse slowed. Not racing, not panicked, focused. The same structure I asked. Almost identical, she confirmed, adjusted slightly, but clearly derived from what you showed Lily. I closed my eyes briefly, not out of relief, out of confirmation. He didn't wait, I said. No, Margaret replied. He didn't, which meant one thing. He believes it's real, I said. Yes, she said, and he's already trying to leverage it. Margaret didn't answer immediately. She didn't need to. I already knew. I stood and walked slowly across the room, my thoughts aligning with a clarity that felt almost cold. Ryan Keller hadn't hesitated. He hadn't questioned. He hadn't slowed down to consider whether the opportunity was legitimate. He saw access, and he moved. Now we know, Margaret said quietly. Yes, I replied. Now we knew, not just what he was capable of, but how quickly he would act when he thought he had something to gain, and more importantly, how little it took for him to reveal himself. I stopped by the window, looking out into the dark. He's not as careful as he thinks, I said. No, Margaret agreed. He's confident. Overconfident, I corrected. A brief pause. Then, what do you want to do next, she asked. I didn't answer right away, because for the first time since this began, I wasn't reacting, I wasn't guessing, I wasn't hoping, I knew. And when you know exactly who you're dealing with, the next move becomes very simple. I turned slightly, my reflection faint in the glass. Now I said quietly, we let him go a little further. Margaret's voice remained calm. Are you sure? I smiled faintly. He thinks he's winning, I said. And people like Ryan... I paused. They always reveal the most when they believe no one can stop them. Silence. Then I'll prepare the next step, Margaret said. Good, I replied. As I ended the call, I set my phone down slowly. The house was still, peaceful, unaware of what was unfolding beneath the surface. But I wasn't, and neither was Ryan. Not yet, but he would be, soon, because the path he had chosen was leading him exactly where I wanted him to go. And this time, I wasn't just listening. I was guiding every step he took. There's a quiet shift that happens when suspicion turns into certainty. It doesn't come with panic. It doesn't come with anger. It comes with precision. The morning after Margaret called, I didn't rush to act. I didn't call Lily. I didn't reach out to Ryan. I didn't even open my laptop. Instead, I made breakfast. Eggs, toast, coffee, normal things. Because the more ordinary I behaved, the more confident Ryan would become that everything was unfolding exactly as he expected. And that was the most dangerous illusion I could give him. By mid-morning, Lily texted, "Mom, Ryan loved what you shared yesterday. He said it makes so much sense." Of course he did. I stared at the message for a moment before replying, "I'm glad. We'll talk more soon." No questions, no pressure. Just enough warmth to keep everything moving forward. Within seconds, she responded. He actually had a few ideas about how to structure it better. Maybe we can all sit down together. There it was. Not curiosity anymore. Participation. I set my phone down slowly, letting the weight of that settle. Ryan wasn't just reacting to the information. He was already trying to reshape it. And that told me something important. He believed the asset was within reach. Later that afternoon, I received another update from Margaret. "He's escalating," she said simply. How I asked. "He's not just asking questions anymore," she replied. "He's proposing adjustments through intermediaries." I leaned forward in my chair. "Adjustments to what?" "To ownership distribution," she said. "Timing, control conditions, control conditions." I almost smiled. "Already," I said. "Yes," Margaret confirmed. "He's moving faster than expected." Which meant one thing. "He's afraid of losing the opportunity," I said. "Exactly." I stood and began pacing slowly across my study. "What kind of conditions?" I asked. Margaret paused briefly as if reviewing notes. "He's suggesting that any partial transfer be structured in a way that allows for flexible decision-making authority." I stopped. "Flexible," I repeated. "Yes," she said. We both understood what that meant. Influence, leverage, the ability to steer decisions once ownership was established. "He's not thinking long-term," I said. "No," Margaret replied. "He's thinking strategically, but not defensively. He assumes no one is watching." "Yes." I exhaled slowly. Good. That was exactly where we needed him. 2 days later, Lily invited me to dinner at her apartment. "Ryan really wants to talk through everything together," she said over the phone. "Just so we're all aligned." Aligned. Another one of his words. "I'd be happy to," I replied. And I meant it. Because this was the moment where observation would become confirmation. Their apartment was modern, carefully styled in a way that felt more curated than lived in. Everything had its place. Everything looked intentional. Ryan greeted me at the door with that same easy smile. "Eva," he said warmly, "I'm really glad you came." "I wouldn't miss it," I replied. His hand lingered on my shoulder just a second too long, a gesture of familiarity. Ownership. I noted it. Eric was already there, sitting casually on the couch, a glass of wine in his hand. He nodded politely as I entered. "Mrs. Collins," he said. "Eric," I replied with a small smile. We moved to the dining table where Lily had set everything beautifully. She looked nervous but hopeful. That combination again. Ryan waited until we were seated before speaking. "I just want to say," he began, "how much I appreciate you being open to this conversation." I nodded. "Of course," I said, "we're family." His eyes flickered just briefly at that word. Then he smiled again. "Exactly," he said. There it was. The performance. And underneath it, the calculation. So he continued, leaning slightly forward. "I've been thinking about what you shared, the property, the structure, and I had a few ideas." "I'd love to hear them," I said calmly. He glanced at Lily, then back at me. "Well," he said, "if the goal is long-term stability, it might make sense to streamline decision-making authority early on." There it was again. Streamline. Control. "And how would that work?" I asked. His tone remained smooth. Just a more flexible arrangement, he said, so that Lily and I can make decisions efficiently without unnecessary complications. Unnecessary complications, meaning me. I folded my hands gently on the table. And you believe that would benefit Lily, I asked. Of course, he said immediately. Everything I do is for her. Lily smiled softly beside him. I turned my gaze to her. Do you feel that way, I asked. She hesitated, just for a second, then nodded. I think it makes sense, she said. Not conviction. Agreement, there's a difference. Dinner continued. Polite and controlled on the surface, but underneath I was listening. Not just to the words, to the pauses, the timing, the subtle shifts in tone, and then it happened. Ryan leaned slightly toward Eric, lowering his voice just enough that Lily wouldn't notice, but not enough to escape me. Wenn das klappt, haben wir mehr Kontrolle als erwartet, he murmured. If this works, we'll have more control than expected. Eric smirked faintly. Du hast gesagt, sie ist leicht zu lenken, he replied. You said she's easy to steer. Ryan's eyes flicked briefly toward Lily. Sie ist es, he said quietly. She is. Something inside me didn't break. It solidified, because this was no longer theory, no longer interpretation. This was confirmation, clear, undeniable. He wasn't just targeting me. He was positioning himself over her. I set my glass down carefully. Not too hard, not too soft, just enough to draw attention. Ryan looked up immediately. Everything okay, he asked. I smiled. Yes, I said gently. Then I leaned back slightly, meeting his eyes with a calm he didn't yet understand. I was just thinking, I continued, how important it is for everyone involved to fully understand what's being discussed. His expression didn't change, but something behind it did. A flicker. Instinct. Of course, he said smoothly. That's exactly what we're doing. I held his gaze for a moment longer. Yes, I said softly. I believe it is. Later that night as I drove home, I didn't turn on the radio. I didn't need distraction. I had everything I needed. Proof, not on paper, not yet, but in behavior, in language, in intent. Ryan Keller had revealed exactly who he was, and more importantly, he had done it while believing he was in control. I pulled into my driveway and sat there for a moment, the engine still running. Then I reached for my phone. Margaret answered on the second ring. Well, she asked. I smiled faintly. He's not just taking the bait, I said. He's redesigning the trap for himself. A pause. Then that's what we needed, she said. Yes, I replied. I turned off the engine, the silence settling around me once more. He's ready to be exposed, I said. Margaret's voice remained calm. Then we choose the moment. I stepped out of the car, the cool night air brushing against my skin. No, I said quietly, we choose the stage. Because this wasn't just about stopping him anymore. It wasn't just about protecting what was mine. It was about making sure he never had the chance to do this to anyone else again. And for that, the truth wouldn't just need to be revealed. It would need to be undeniable, public, final. I closed the car door behind me and walked toward the house. And for the first time since this began, I wasn't waiting. I was deciding. Once you see the truth clearly, there is no going back to half measures. By the time the pre-wedding venue visit was scheduled, everything had shifted beneath the surface, quietly, precisely, and entirely in my favor. Ryan didn't know that. Lily didn't fully understand it yet, but I did, and Margaret did, and that was enough. The venue was a restored estate just outside the city-wide stone steps, tall white columns, and sweeping lawns that looked like they belonged in a magazine. Lily had chosen it for its timeless elegance. Ryan had approved it because it impressed people. Two very different reasons. We arrived mid-morning, sunlight stretching across the grounds as staff prepared for the upcoming weekend events. Lily walked ahead, speaking with the coordinator about seating arrangements, her voice light hopeful. She was trying to hold on to something pure. I could see that now. Ryan stayed close to me at first, playing the attentive future son-in-law. Beautiful place, he said, gesturing toward the open grounds. It is, I agreed. He smiled. I just want everything to be perfect for Lily. Of course you do, I thought. Perfection makes things easier to control. Eric joined us shortly after, hands in his pockets, his expression already scanning the space, as if evaluating it rather than appreciating it. We moved through the estate together, ceremony, area, reception hall, outdoor terrace. Everything was planned, Everything was polished. Everything looked exactly like the beginning of a life. But I knew better now. This wasn't a beginning. It was a setup. At one point, Lily was pulled aside by the coordinator to review floral arrangements. Ryan excused himself to take a call. That left me alone, with Eric. He stood beside me near the edge of the terrace, looking out over the lawn. Americans like this kind of thing, he said casually. Big, clean, predictable. I smiled faintly. Some do, I replied. He glanced at me briefly, then looked away again. You must be proud, he added. Your daughter marrying well. The phrasing was deliberate, marrying well, as if this were a transaction. I'm proud of my daughter, I said evenly. He gave a small, almost amused nod. Yes, he said, of course. There was a pause. Then without warning, he spoke again, this time in German. Er ist fast da wo sein will. He's almost where he wants to be. I didn't react, didn't even blink, just kept my gaze on the lawn ahead. Eric continued his tone, light careless. Sie hat keine Ahnung, she has no idea. A beat, then und die Tochter, and the daughter I didn't turn. But I listened, because I knew Ryan had returned before I even heard his footsteps. You weißt doch, Ryan replied quietly behind me. You know, there was a faint sound of movement, him stepping closer. Sie vertraut mir, he added. She trusts me. Eric gave a low chuckle. Das ist alles, was du brauchst. That's all you need. Ryan didn't deny it. That was the part that mattered most. Because silence, in the right moment, is confirmation. I let a few seconds pass, then I turned slowly as if I had just noticed them. Oh, I said lightly, there you are. Ryan's expression shifted instantly, warm, attentive, flawless. Sorry, he said. Work call. Of course, I replied. Eric had already stepped back, his face composed, masks on, roles resumed, but it didn't matter anymore. I had heard enough. The rest of the visit passed in a blur of details, menu tastings, lighting discussions, timelines. I participated where needed, smiled when expected, but internally everything had changed. Because what I had just heard wasn't just manipulation, it was confirmation of intent. Ryan wasn't uncertain, he wasn't hesitant. He believed he was already succeeding, and that belief was about to cost him everything. Later that afternoon, Lily and I walked alone through the garden path behind the estate. She slipped her arm through mine, resting her head briefly against my shoulder. Isn't it beautiful? She said softly. It is, I replied. I just want everything to feel right, she added. I looked at her then. Really looked. She was trying so hard to hold everything together, to believe in the version of her life she had imagined, and for a moment, just a moment, I wished she could have it, without any of this. But reality doesn't bend for wishes, Lily. I said gently, can I ask you something? She nodded, of course. I stopped walking, turning to face her fully. Has Ryan asked you to sign anything recently? Her expression shifted immediately. Not fear, not yet, but discomfort. No, she said quickly. Why? I held her gaze. No drafts, I asked. No revisions, no suggestions. She hesitated, and that was enough. Just small things, she admitted. Nothing official. What kind of small things? She exhaled slowly. He mentioned updating the prenup, she said, just to make it more balanced. Balanced. There it was again. And what does balanced mean to him? I asked quietly. She looked away. I don't know, as she said. He said it's just standard. I nodded slowly. Did you sign anything? I asked. No, she said quickly. Not yet. Relief moved through me, but I didn't show it. Good, I said softly. She frowned slightly. Mom, why are you asking me this? I stepped closer, placing my hands gently on her arms. Because I need you to trust me, I said. She searched my face. I do, she said. Then don't sign anything, I continued. Not yet. Not until we go through it together. Her hesitation was immediate. Ryan's just trying to make things easier, Lily. I said, my voice still calm but firmer now. She stopped. Something in my tone reached her. I'm not asking you to mistrust him, I said. I'm asking you to protect yourself. Silence. Then, okay, she said quietly, not fully convinced, but listening. And for now, that was enough. That evening back at home, I transferred the recording from my phone. Every word, every tone, every piece of confirmation. I sent a copy to Margaret. Then I sat back, staring at the screen as the audio file finished uploading. A strange calm settled over me. Not relief, not satisfaction, something deeper, final, because there was no longer any doubt. No room for interpretation, no uncertainty. Ryan Keller wasn't just opportunistic, he was deliberate, and he believed he was untouchable. I picked up my phone and called Margaret. "I have it," I said simply. A brief pause. "Then good." She replied. I closed my eyes for a moment. "He's not just planning," I added. "He's executing." "I expected as much," she said. "And Lily," she asked. "She's starting to see it," I said. "But she's not there yet." "That's okay," Margaret replied. "She will be." I opened my eyes, staring out into the dark beyond the window. When I asked, Margaret didn't hesitate. "When he pushes too far?" I nodded slowly, because we both knew that moment was coming. And when it did, everything would break. Not quietly, not privately, but completely. I ended the call and set my phone down. The house was still, but the story unfolding inside it was anything but. Because now, it wasn't just about proving who Ryan was. It was about making sure. Everyone saw it. There is a moment quiet, fragile, when denial begins to crack. It doesn't shatter all at once. It softens first, then bends, and finally, it breaks. I saw that moment begin in Lily 2 nights after the venue visit. She called me just after 9. Her voice was different, not defensive, not rehearsed. Tired. "Mom, can I come over?" "Of course," I said immediately. She arrived 20 minutes later, her hair pulled back loosely, her makeup half worn away, as if she had been rubbing at her face for hours. She didn't say anything at first, just walked inside, set her bag down, and stood there, lost. I didn't rush her. I simply gestured toward the living room. "Come sit," I said softly. She did, and then without warning, her composure cracked. "I don't know what's happening," she said, her voice breaking. I sat beside her close, but not overwhelming. "Tell me," I said. She took a shaky breath. "Ryan's been different," she admitted. "Or maybe I'm just noticing things I didn't before." There it was, the shift. "What kind of things?" I asked gently. She wiped at her eyes. "He keeps bringing up the same topics," she said. "Money, planning, fairness." The word sounded strained now, like it no longer fit. "And the prenup?" I asked carefully. Her expression tightened. "He wants to revise it," she said. "He says the original version is too one-sided." "In whose favor?" I asked. She hesitated. "Then yours?" she said quietly. I nodded. "And what changes does he want?" She looked down at her hands, twisting her fingers together. "He says, it should reflect that we are building a future together," she said. "That if something happens, everything should be shared equally." "Everything?" I asked. She nodded slowly. "Including future assets. Including what Thomas and I had built long before Ryan ever entered our lives." "And how does that make you feel?" I asked. She didn't answer right away, because for the first time, she wasn't repeating his words. She was searching for her own. "I thought it made sense at first," she admitted. "I mean, isn't that what marriage is, sharing everything?" "It can be," I said gently, "when both people are bringing equal understanding and equal intent." She looked up at me. "What does that mean?" she asked. I held her gaze. "It means," I said softly, "that sharing should come from trust, not pressure." That landed. I saw it in the way her shoulders sank slightly, in the way her eyes shifted not away from me but inward. "He doesn't pressure me," she said quickly. Too quickly, I didn't argue. Instead, I asked, "Then why do you feel like this silence?" Heavy, unavoidable. She opened her mouth, then closed it again, because she didn't have an answer that fit both truths at once. "He just keeps bringing it up," she said finally. "In different ways. How often?" A lot, she admitted. "Almost every day now. And when you don't agree right away," she hesitated again. "Then he gets quiet," she said, "distant." There it was. Not force. Withdrawal. A different kind of control. "And how does that make you feel?" I asked. She swallowed. "Like I'm doing something wrong," she said. The words were barely above a whisper. My chest tightened. Because that was the moment. The exact moment manipulation becomes effective. When love begins to feel conditional. "Lily," I said gently, "that's not what a healthy conversation feels like." Her eyes filled again. I know she whispered, and for the first time she said it without defending him. We sat in silence for a while after that. Not uncomfortable, not tense, just real. "I didn't want to see it," she admitted eventually, "because if I did, then everything changes. I nodded slowly. Yes, I said. It does. She looked at me, then fear flickering across her face. What if I'm wrong? She asked. What if I'm just overthinking everything? I reached for her hand, holding it firmly. You're not wrong for asking questions, I said, and you're not wrong for protecting yourself. She squeezed my hand slightly. But what if he really just wants to build a life with me? She pressed. I didn't answer immediately, because this was the most important moment of all. The place where truth had to be clear, but not forced. Then he'll respect your boundaries, I said quietly. Her breath caught. And if he doesn't, she asked. I met her gaze. Then you'll have your answer. She stayed late that night. We talked about everything, but not all at once. Not as an argument, as a slow unfolding. I didn't tell her everything I knew, not yet. She wasn't ready. But I gave her enough to start seeing clearly. And more importantly, I let her arrive at those realizations herself. Because truth that is forced is rejected. Truth that is discovered stays. The next morning, everything accelerated. Lily called me again. Her voice was different this time. Tight, controlled, Mom. She said, Ryan wants me to sign something today. My entire body stilled. What is it? I asked calmly. A revised agreement, she said. He says it's just a draft, but he wants to lock it in early. Lock it in. The phrasing was unmistakable. Did you see it? I asked. Yes, she said, but I didn't understand all of it. Send it to me, I said immediately. A pause. Then, okay. Seconds later, my phone buzzed. I opened the document, and there it was. Exactly what we feared. Language designed to blur ownership, clauses that shifted future control, subtle but intentional, and most importantly, timed, before the wedding, before everything became harder to undo. I closed my eyes briefly, not in fear, in confirmation. He's pushing, I said quietly. What Lily asked. I opened my eyes again. He's moving faster, I said, which means he's worried about what she asked. I stood pacing slowly across the room. About losing control, I replied. Silence. Then, what do I do? She asked. I stopped. This was the moment, the turning point. Nothing I said, what she asked, confused. Don't sign it, I said firmly, and don't argue about it either. Then what? I took a breath. Let him think you might, I said. Another pause. Then, you want me to pretend? She asked. I want you to stay safe, I replied. She didn't speak for a moment. Then, okay, she said. And this time, there was no hesitation. After the call ended, I stood in the quiet of my study. Everything was moving now, faster than before, exactly as Margaret predicted. I picked up my phone and called her. He made his move, I said. I assumed he would, she replied. I walked to the window, watching the stillness outside. He wants her to sign before the wedding, I added. Then he's running out of time, Margaret said. Yes, I replied. And that was the key. Time, pressure, exposure. He's about to make a mistake, I said quietly. Margaret's voice remained calm. Then we make sure it's one he can't recover from. I nodded slowly, because now there was no more uncertainty, no more waiting. Ryan Keller had crossed the line, and he had done it believing no one could see it. But we did. And very soon, so would everyone else. There are moments in life when the past reaches forward quietly, deliberately, and places something in your hands you didn't know you would need. For me, that moment came the morning after Lily showed me the revised agreement. I didn't sleep much that night. Not because I was afraid, because everything was aligning. Ryan had pushed too early, too aggressively. He had revealed not just his intent, but his urgency. And urgency makes people careless. By sunrise, I was already in my study. The agreement Lily sent sat printed on my desk, every clause marked, every line dissected. Margaret had gone through it with surgical precision, outlining exactly where control shifted, where ambiguity was intentional, and where long-term consequences were buried beneath standard language. There was no doubt anymore. Ryan wasn't preparing for a marriage, he was preparing for access. But something else had been bothering me. Something quieter, something older. A feeling I couldn't quite place until I opened the bottom drawer of my desk. It wasn't where I kept current documents. It was where I kept things I wasn't ready to let go of. Letters, old files, memories I had folded away after Thomas died. I hadn't opened that drawer in years, but that morning, I did. And there it was. A sealed envelope, my name written across the front in Thomas's handwriting. Eva. Just that. No date. No explanation. I stared at it for a long moment, my fingers hovering just above the paper. I remembered it suddenly, vaguely. He had given it to me years ago during a conversation about the future, about Lily, about what we were building. Only open this if something ever feels wrong, he had said. At the time, I laughed it off. Things didn't feel wrong. They felt secure, stable, certain. But now, I picked up the envelope slowly and broke the seal. The letter inside was short, direct, exactly like him. Eva. If you're reading this, then something has shifted in a way we always knew was possible, but hoped would never happen. We built something valuable, not just financially, but structurally. And anything with structure can be studied, tested, and eventually exploited, especially by someone patient. I paused my breath, catching slightly. He had known, not specifically about Ryan, but about the possibility, about human nature. I continued reading. I've put a secondary protection in place, something separate from the main trust. It's dormant, invisible unless activated. If you ever believe that Lily or what we built is being influenced under pressure, manipulation, or misrepresentation, you can trigger it. It will move her inheritance into a protected structure, independent oversight, restricted access, no external leverage. It won't feel pleasant to do it. It may even feel like you're taking something away, but you're not. You're preserving it until she's safe enough to hold it fully on her own. My hands tightened slightly around the paper. Every word, precise, intentional. You've always been better at reading people than I was, he wrote. Trust that. And if the time comes, don't hesitate, Thomas. I lowered the letter slowly. The room felt different. Not heavier, stronger, because suddenly, this wasn't just my instinct anymore. This was something we had prepared for, together, even now, even after he was gone. I sat back in my chair, the letter still in my hands. Ryan thought he understood the structure. He thought he was working toward control, but he didn't know this existed. He didn't know there was a layer he couldn't see, and that was his biggest mistake. I called Margaret immediately. I found something I said. She didn't ask what. She just said, tell me. I explained everything, the letter, the clause, the mechanism Thomas had put in place. There was a brief silence on the other end. Then, that's not just protection, Margaret said quietly. That's containment. I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. Yes, I said. And it changes everything. Can it be activated quickly? She asked. Yes, I replied, but it requires documentation, evidence of coercion or manipulation. Margaret didn't hesitate. We have that, she said. I looked down at the agreement on my desk, at the recordings, at everything Ryan had already revealed. Yes, I said, we do, but I didn't move immediately. Because this wasn't just a legal decision, it was a personal one. Activating that clause meant shifting Lily's future, not permanently but significantly. It meant stepping in, at a level she might not fully understand yet, and that mattered. So I called her. She answered on the first ring. Mom, can you come over, I asked. A pause. Then yes, she said. I'll be there soon. When Lily arrived, I didn't start with the documents. I started with the letter. She sat across from me in the study, her expression still tense from everything that had been unfolding. What is this? She asked as I handed it to her. Something your father left, I said softly. She frowned slightly, then began to read. I watched her carefully. Every shift, every realization, every moment where something inside her connected. By the time she reached the end, her hands were trembling slightly. He knew she whispered. Yes, I said. She looked up at me, her eyes searching. And you think this is happening now, she asked. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I reached for the agreement she had sent me and placed it beside the letter. Look at this, I said. She did. Slower this time, more carefully. Because now, she wasn't just trusting. She was seeing. What am I looking for? She asked quietly. Control, I said. She read in silence for a long moment. Then her expression changed, subtly, but unmistakably. This shifts things, she said slowly. Yes, I replied. It's not equal, she added. No, I said. It isn't. Her breath caught. He said it was standard, she whispered. I know, I said. She looked back down at the paper, then back at the letter, then at me. And in that moment, the denial finally broke. Mom, she said, her voice shaking. What do we do? I leaned forward slightly. We protect you, I said, her eyes filled with tears. But that means, I know, I said gently. She swallowed hard. He's going to know something's wrong. Yes, I said, and that's okay. She stared at me for a long moment. Then slowly, she nodded. Not out of fear, not out of confusion, but out of understanding. That afternoon, Margaret began the process, quietly, precisely. The clause Thomas had left behind was activated, documentation submitted, structures adjusted, everything moved exactly as designed. Ryan didn't see it, not yet, but the foundation beneath him had already shifted. That evening, Lily called me again. I told him I need more time, she said. How did he react? I asked. A pause. Not well, she admitted. I closed my eyes briefly. Did he push? I asked. Yes, she said, more than before. Of course he did, because now he could feel it. Not the truth, but the resistance. And that was enough to make him panic. Stay calm, I said. Don't argue. I won't, she replied. Another pause. Then Mom. Yes, thank you. My chest tightened slightly. For what I asked, for not letting me walk into something I didn't understand, she said. I smiled faintly. You're still walking through it, I said. I know, she replied, but now I can see it. After the call ended, I stood alone in the quiet house. The letter still on my desk, the documents beside it. Everything connected now, everything clear. Ryan thought he was close to winning. He thought the timing was perfect. He thought Lily was still within his reach. But he didn't know the structure had changed. The control he was chasing was already gone. And very soon, so would be his illusion of power. Because the next time he made a move, it wouldn't just be a mistake. It would be the moment everything collapsed. The week of the wedding arrived with a strange kind of calm. On the surface, everything moved exactly as it should. Florists delivered arrangements. The caterer confirmed final numbers. Lily attended fittings, tastings, rehearsals, each step unfolding like a carefully choreographed performance. And I played my part, perfectly. If anyone had looked at me from the outside, they would have seen a composed mother, gracious, supportive, fully present in her daughter's wedding preparations. They would have seen me smile. They would have seen me laugh. They would have seen nothing unusual at all. And that was precisely the point. Because beneath that calm, everything had already shifted. Ryan just didn't know it yet. The first sign that he felt something was off came 3 days before the ceremony. Lily called me after a meeting with him. He's asking more questions, she said quietly. About timelines, about when things will be finalized. Stay consistent, I told her. Tell him we're reviewing everything carefully. I am, she said. But he keeps pushing. Of course he did. Pressure was his language. How does he push? I asked. She hesitated. He says, it's important to lock things in before the wedding, she replied. That it'll be harder to make changes afterward. I closed my eyes briefly. Exactly as expected. And how do you respond? I asked. I tell him I need time, she said. That I don't want to rush something this important. Good, I said. Keep doing that. A pause. Then he's getting frustrated, Mom. I exhaled slowly. Let him, I said, because frustration leads to mistakes. And mistakes reveal truth. That same evening, we attended the final dress fitting. Lily stood in front of the mirror, the soft white fabric falling perfectly around her. For a moment, everything felt real, simple. She looked like a bride, not a woman caught in something complicated, just a daughter about to begin her life. You look beautiful, I said softly. She smiled. Do you really think so? I know so, I replied. Her smile faded slightly as she turned back toward the mirror. Sometimes I wish things were easier, she admitted. I stepped closer. They will be, I said gently, not because I believed the situation would resolve itself, but because I knew we were about to end it. Later that night, I received a message from Margaret. Everything is in place. 3 words, simple, final. The protection Thomas had built was fully activated. Lily's inheritance was no longer exposed, not to Ryan, not to anyone attempting to access it through her. The structure had shifted, irreversibly. Ryan was still playing a game whose rules had already changed, and he had no idea. The next day, we held the rehearsal at the venue. Family members gathered, laughter echoing through the halls, glasses clinking softly as people settled into their roles. Ryan moved through the room with his usual ease. Charming. confident, entirely composed, but I watched him closely, and this time, I saw it. Not in his words, not in his smile, in the edges, the slight tension in his jaw, the way his eyes lingered just a second too long when conversations turned toward timing, control, access. He could feel something slipping. He just didn't know what. During the rehearsal dinner, he stayed close to Lily, too close. His hand resting at her back, his voice low when he spoke to her, constant, reinforcing, guiding. I sat across from them, observing quietly, waiting. Because I knew he wouldn't hold it together much longer. Halfway through the evening, he leaned slightly toward Eric again, the same pattern, the same assumption, the same mistake. Waarom dauert das so lange? He muttered under his breath. Why is this taking so long? Eric shrugged lightly. Vielleicht ist sie vorsichtiger als du dachtest. Maybe she's more cautious than you thought. Ryan's expression tightened. Nein, he said quietly. Sie ist nur zögerlich. No, she's just hesitant. A pause. Then nach morgen ist das egal. After tomorrow it won't matter. I felt something inside me settle. Not anger, not even satisfaction. Certainty. Because there it was. His timeline. His assumption. His belief that everything would fall into place after the wedding. That once the ceremony was complete, control would follow. The dinner continued. Speeches were given. Laughter filled the room, glasses were raised, and all the while, Ryan played his role, perfectly, until he thought no one was listening. Near the end of the evening, Lily excused herself briefly to speak with one of the coordinators. Ryan watched her go, then turned slightly toward Eric. She wird morgen unterschreiben, he said quietly. She will sign tomorrow. Eric raised an eyebrow. Bist du sicher? Are you sure? Ryan nodded. Ich kenne sie. I know her. That was the moment. Not because of what he said, but because of how certain he sounded. Absolute, confident, unquestioning, and completely wrong. I set my glass down slowly, then stood. Not abruptly, not dramatically, just deliberately. The room didn't notice at first, not yet, but Ryan did. His eyes flicked toward me immediately. Instinct, recognition. Something in my posture had changed. I could see it in the way he straightened slightly. Alert. Eva? He said, his tone still polite. Everything okay? I smiled. Calm, measured. Yes, I said. Then I glanced around the room at the family, the guests, the carefully constructed moment. This evening has been wonderful, I continued. People began to quiet, attention shifting. Subtle at first, then more focused. I'm so happy to see everyone here, I added, to celebrate something so important. Ryan's smile returned, but it didn't reach his eyes this time. Because something was wrong. He could feel it now, just not enough to understand it. Before we continue, I said gently, there's something I think we should address. The room stilled. Completely. Lily turned back toward me, confusion flickering across her face. Mom, she said softly. I met her gaze, reassuring, steady. Then I looked at Ryan directly. Something that affects the future we're all here to celebrate, I said. His expression didn't break, but I saw it. That flicker again, that instinct, that realization, too late. Because the moment had already begun, and there was no stopping it now. The air in the room felt different, charged. Not with chaos, with anticipation. Ryan shifted slightly in his seat, his posture tightening just enough that someone watching closely, someone like me, would notice. What do you mean, he asked smoothly. Still composed, still performing, but beneath it, cracks. I held his gaze, and for the first time, I didn't pretend. Just something that needs clarity. I said, my voice remained calm, even, controlled, but the meaning behind it was anything but. Because this wasn't just a conversation anymore. This was the beginning of the end, and Ryan Keller, still smiling, still confident, still believing he was in control, had no idea that everything he had built his plan on was about to disappear. The room didn't fall silent all at once. It happened in layers. First, the conversations closest to me faded forks, pausing mid-air glasses, hovering just before lips. Then the rest followed like a ripple moving outward until the entire room held its breath, without quite knowing why. Ryan was still smiling. That was the remarkable thing. Even as the air shifted, even as every instinct in him must have been telling him something was wrong. He held the expression perfectly in place, controlled, practiced. But his eyes, they were searching now, calculating, trying to understand what had changed. "Eva," he said again, his tone warm but edged now with something sharper. "What kind of clarity are you referring to?" I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I turned slightly, addressing the room. "I know this isn't the usual time or place for a conversation like this," I said gently, "and I appreciate everyone's patience." A few guests exchanged glances. Confusion, curiosity, concern. Lily stepped closer to me, her voice low. "Mom, what's going on?" I reached for her hand, squeezing it lightly. "Just stay with me," I said softly. She nodded, not because she understood, but because she trusted. That mattered. It mattered more than anything else in that room. I turned back toward Ryan. "This is about timing," I said calmly, "about decisions being made and the assumptions behind them." His brow furrowed slightly. "I'm not sure I follow," he replied. "Of course you don't," I thought. "Not yet." "That's all right," I said. "We'll get there." Eric shifted in his seat, his expression less composed than his brother's now. He glanced at Ryan briefly, as if silently asking whether this was still under control. Ryan gave the smallest nod, a signal. Stay calm, stay quiet, still believing he could manage this. I stepped slightly to the side, giving myself a clearer view of everyone present. Family, friends, witnesses, that was important, because what was about to happen could not be undone. I think I continued before a marriage begins. It's important that everyone involved understands exactly what they're entering into. A murmur moved through the room. Soft, uneasy, Ryan let out a small, controlled laugh. "Well," he said lightly, "I think that's exactly what we've been doing." I looked at him. Directly. "Yes," I said. "I believe you have." Something in my tone landed, not loudly but precisely, and for the first time his smile faltered. Just for a second, Lily tightened her grip on my hand. "Mom," she whispered, "please just tell me what's happening." I turned to her, my voice softening. I said gently. "Just give me a moment." She nodded again. Her breathing shallow now, but steady. She was ready, even if she didn't fully know it yet. I reached into my bag and pulled out a small folder. Not thick, not dramatic, but enough. I placed it on the table in front of me. Ryan's eyes dropped to it immediately, then back to me. "What's that?" he asked. "Something we should all look at together," I replied. His posture shifted slightly, subtle but unmistakable. This wasn't part of his plan. I opened the folder slowly, not to create suspense, but to control the pace, because once this started, there would be no slowing it down. "I've spent the last few days reviewing some documents," I said. "Agreements, proposals, revisions." Ryan's jaw tightened. "Barely, but enough." And in doing so, I continued, "I realized something important." I lifted one of the papers slightly. "Some of these changes don't quite say what they appear to say." A quiet murmur spread again. Lily looked between us, confusion turning into something sharper. "Ryan," she said softly. He didn't look at her. Not yet. He was still looking at me, assessing, calculating. "How so?" he asked. His voice was calm, too calm. "I think you know how," I said. And that was the moment, the exact moment, when control shifted, because for the first time he couldn't predict my next move. Eric leaned forward slightly. "This feels unnecessary," he said, his tone firmer now. "If there's a concern, it can be handled privately." I turned to him. "Normally, I would agree," I said. Then I looked back at Ryan. "But this situation isn't private." Silence. Heavy. Unavoidable. Lily's hand tightened in mine. "Mom," she said, her voice trembling now. I squeezed her hand gently. "It's okay," I said. Then I let go. Because what came next, she needed a face standing on her own. I closed the folder, deliberately. Then I looked directly at Ryan, and for the first time I let the mask drop completely. "You've been very careful," I said. His expression froze, not outwardly, but internally. I could see it. "You've chosen your words well," I continued. "You've guided conversations, redirected attention, positioned yourself through Lily. No one moved, no one spoke, because now everyone understood." Something real was happening. Ryan's voice when he spoke was still controlled. "I think you're misunderstanding, no," I said calmly. "I'm not." And then I took a small step closer, not aggressive, not confrontational, just certain. You've also been speaking in German, I added. That did it. That was the fracture. Eric's head snapped slightly toward Ryan. Ryan's eyes narrowed. Just enough. What does that have to do with anything he asked? Everything. I held his gaze, and for a brief moment I let the silence stretch. Because this was the point of no return. The moment where truth stops being optional and becomes unavoidable. You assumed I said quietly that I didn't understand you. The room felt like it tilted. Lily's breath caught beside me. Ryan didn't move, didn't blink, didn't react. But something behind his eyes collapsed, slowly, irreversibly, and still. He said nothing. I straightened slightly, my voice steady. And because of that, I continued. You said things you believed would never be heard. A chair shifted somewhere in the room. A glass clinked softly against a table. Tiny sounds, too loud in the silence. Ryan finally spoke. What are you trying to say? He asked. But his voice for the first time wasn't smooth. It was tight, controlled, holding something back. I met his gaze, and I didn't look away. I'm saying, I replied quietly, that I heard you. The words settled over the room like a weight, heavy, final, unavoidable. Lily stepped back slightly, her hand rising instinctively to her mouth. Ryan, she whispered, but he didn't look at her. He couldn't. Because for the first time since I met him, he wasn't performing. He was exposed, and he knew it. I took a slow breath, because what came next would end everything. Not gradually, not quietly, but completely. And there would be no undoing it. No explanation that could fix it. No charm that could smooth it over. Just truth, clear, precise, unforgiving. I looked at him one last time. Then I spoke, in German. Du hast gesagt, ich sei nur ein dekoratives Portemonnaie. The words left my mouth calmly, clearly, flawlessly. And for a moment, just a moment, the room didn't react, because most of them didn't understand what I had said. But Ryan did. And Eric did, and that was enough. Ryan's face drained of color, not dramatically, not all at once, but steadily, like something essential had just been removed. Eric sat completely still, his fingers tightening slightly around the stem of his glass. And Lily looked between us, confusion turning rapidly into something else, something sharper, something closer to fear. What did you say? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I didn't look away from Ryan. You called me a decorative old wallet, I translated calmly. A ripple moved through the room, soft gasps, murmurs, disbelief. Lily's eyes widened. Ryan, she said. He didn't answer, not immediately, because he was still trying to recover, still trying to decide which version of himself to present. Denial, charm, outrage, all of them flickered behind his eyes in rapid succession. I didn't give him time. Und du hast gesagt, I continued in German, my voice steady, dass ich nützlich würde sobald ich unterschreibe. And you said I would become useful once I signed. This time I didn't translate. I didn't need to. The tone alone carried enough weight. But I saw the understanding spread anyway as I followed it immediately with English. You said I would become useful once I signed. The room shifted again. Not curiosity now. Recognition. Lily took a step back. No, she whispered. No, that's not Ryan. Tell me that's not true. He turned to her then. Finally. Lily, he began. But his voice was wrong. Not smooth, not controlled, unsteady. And she heard it. Because she knew him. And for the first time, she didn't recognize what she heard. I reached into my bag and pulled out my phone. Then I set it down on the table. Screen facing upward. I didn't just hear you once. I said quietly. Ryan's eyes flicked to the phone, then back to me. Something in his posture changed. Not collapse, defense. Eva, I think you're taking things out of context. He started. I pressed play. The room filled with sound. His voice. Clear. Undeniable. Sie denkt wirklich. Sie hat die Kontrolle. She really thinks she's in control. Eric's quiet laughter followed. Then, Lily is emotional. Man muss nur wissen wann man druckt. Lily is emotional. You just have to know when to push. Lily froze. Completely. Her eyes locked on the phone as if it might disappear if she didn't look directly at it. Ryan moved suddenly. Turn that off, he said sharply, too sharply. There it was, the crack. I didn't touch the phone. I let it play. Die Mutter ist irrelevant, sobald die Unterlagen unterschrieben sind. The mother is irrelevant once the documents are signed. Stop it, Ryan snapped, stepping forward. But Margaret's voice cut in firm, composed, unshaken. That would be a mistake. Every head turned. She had entered quietly. Now she stood near the edge of the room, a folder in her hand, her presence unmistakable. Controlled, authority without effort. Ryan stopped, not because he wanted to, because something in her tone made it clear he should. The recording ended. Silence rushed back in, loud, overwhelming. Lily's breathing was uneven now, shallow, broken. She looked at Ryan, not with confusion anymore, with clarity. "Tell me that's not you," she said. He didn't answer, not right away, because this time there was no version of the truth he could reshape, no way to redirect, no way to soften it. "It's not what it sounds like," he said finally, and that was the worst possible thing he could have said. Because now, she knew. Margaret stepped forward, placing her folder on the table beside my phone. "We also have documentation," she said calmly. Ryan's head snapped toward her. "Who are you?" he demanded. "My name is Margaret Hayes," she replied. "I represent Eva Collins." She opened the folder. Inside were copies, highlighted clauses, marked revisions, everything Ryan had pushed Lily towards signing. This agreement, Margaret continued, sliding one page forward, introduces structural changes that would allow indirect control over future assets through marital alignment. Ryan's jaw tightened. "That's standard language," he started. "No," Margaret said firmly. "It's not." She tapped the page. "It's designed to appear standard," she added. "That's different." Eric shifted in his seat, his composure slipping now. "This is ridiculous," he muttered. "You're twisting, no," I said quietly. "I'm translating." His head snapped toward me, and for the first time there was no amusement in his expression, only calculation, and something else. Concern. Lily stepped back again, her hands trembling at her sides. "You said I was easy to push," she said, her voice shaking. Ryan turned toward her immediately. "That's not what I meant. It's exactly what you meant," I said. And this time I didn't speak in English. "Du hast gesagt, sie ist leicht zu lenken," I repeated. "You said she's easy to steer." The words hit harder this time, because now everyone understood. Not just the language, but the meaning. Ryan's composure broke, not completely, but enough. "You're manipulating this," he said, his voice rising slightly. "You're taking private conversations and turning them into something they're not." I held his gaze. "No," I said calmly. "I'm showing them exactly what they are." Lily shook her head slowly. Tears streamed down her face now, but she didn't wipe them away. "How long?" she asked. Ryan hesitated. And that hesitation said everything. "How long?" she repeated louder this time. He exhaled sharply. "This isn't fair," he said. "You're putting me in a position." "How long?" she demanded. The room held its breath. Because now, this wasn't about me anymore. This was about her, and the truth she had to face. "I don't know," he said finally. "Another mistake, because I don't know is never the right answer. Not here, not now." Lily closed her eyes, just for a second, then opened them again. And when she did, something had changed, not broken, strengthened. She reached up slowly and removed her engagement ring. The room froze. Ryan's breath caught. "Lily," he said, stepping toward her. She stepped back. "No," she said, quiet, firm, final. "You don't get to explain this," she continued. "Not like it's a misunderstanding. It is," he started. "No," she said again. And this time, there was no hesitation. "No, it's not." She looked at him, not with love, not with confusion, with clarity. "You studied me," she said. "You used me." "That's not true." "It is," she said. Then she placed the ring on the table, right next to the documents, right next to the truth. "I'm not marrying you," she said. The silence that followed wasn't uncertain anymore. It was final. Ryan stood there frozen, for the first time, without a move, without a strategy, without control. Eric looked away, because even he understood it was over. I didn't speak. I didn't need to, because everything that mattered had already been said, and everything Ryan had tried to build had collapsed, exactly as it was always going to, once the truth was finally heard. There is a particular kind of silence that follows truth, not confusion, not shock, something deeper, something irreversible. It settled over the room after Lily placed the ring on the table, thick, unmoving, almost physical in its weight. No one spoke. No one shifted. Even the air felt different, as if it had been cleared of something invisible but heavy. Ryan stood exactly where he was, still, but not composed anymore, not controlled. His expression had changed in a way that couldn't be repaired with a smile or softened with charm. The confidence he had worn so carefully, the one that filled every room he entered, had collapsed into something far less stable. Calculation was still there, but now it was desperate. "This is a mistake," he said finally. The words came out too quickly, too tightly. A reflex, not a strategy. Lily didn't respond. She was looking at the ring, not with longing, not with hesitation, just recognition. As if she were finally seeing what it really was. Not a promise, not a future, a decision she was undoing. "You're letting her do this." Ryan turned sharply toward me, his tone shifting from defensive to accusatory. "You're just going to stand there and tear this apart." I met his gaze calmly. "I didn't tear anything apart," I said. "You built this," I added quietly. "I just made it visible." His jaw tightened. "That's not what this is," he said. "You've been manipulating her," filling her head with doubts, "twisting everything I've said." "No," Lily said. Her voice was quiet, but it stopped him immediately. He turned toward her again, and this time he didn't recognize her, because she wasn't the same person he had been speaking to for months. "I heard you," she said. "Not loud, not emotional. Clear. You heard something." He replied quickly. "Out of context, I heard enough," she said. Her hands were still trembling slightly, but her voice held. "You didn't just talk about my mom," she continued. "You talked about me, about how to push me, how to steer me." He exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair. "That's not what I meant." "Then what did you mean?" she asked. Silence, because there was no answer that could undo what had already been said, and he knew it. Eric stood up abruptly, breaking the stillness. "This has gone too far," he said, his voice strained now. "You're making accusations based on private conversations. You were part of those conversations," I said calmly. He froze. "You encouraged them," I added. His eyes flicked toward Ryan, then back to me. "You don't understand," he began. "No," I said softly, "I understand perfectly." And that was the difference. He realized it. Ryan realized it. There was no confusion here, no misunderstanding, only exposure. From the far end of the room, a voice spoke. "Ryan." Everyone turned. His mother stood there. She hadn't said much all evening, just observed, quiet, composed in a way that mirrored him more than I had noticed before. But now, her expression had changed. Not shock, not disbelief, recognition. "What is this?" she asked. Ryan hesitated, and in that hesitation, something passed between them. Not spoken, but understood. "Mom, this isn't what it looks like," he said, the same line, the same reflex, but it didn't land the same way, because she didn't respond immediately. She just looked at him, long, carefully, and then, "Isn't it?" she said quietly. The room stilled again, because this time, it wasn't just me. It wasn't just Lily, it was his own family, and they were starting to see it too. "You've done this before, haven't you?" she asked. Ryan's entire body went still, not defensive, not reactive, frozen. "Mom," he started. "Answer me," she said. Her voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. He looked at her, then away, then back again, and in that moment, the last piece fell into place. Because silence can be louder than any confession. His father shifted uncomfortably beside her. "We should take this outside," he muttered. "No," she said, firm, clear, "we won't." She kept her eyes on Ryan. How many times, she asked. He didn't answer, but he didn't deny it either, and that was enough. Lily stepped back again, her expression shifting from hurt to something else. Understanding, not just of what he had done to her, but of who he was. "This isn't the first time," she said slowly. It wasn't a question. He didn't respond because he couldn't, because now everyone knew. "I thought," she began, her voice breaking slightly, "I thought we were building something real." Ryan looked at her, something flickering across his face, frustration maybe, or regret, but not guilt, not the kind that matters. "It was real," he said quickly. "Another mistake. Because now the lie was visible." Lily shook her head. "No," she said, "it wasn't." And this time, there was no hesitation at all. Margaret stepped forward slightly, her presence grounding the room again. For clarity, she said calmly, "Any agreements discussed or proposed will not be proceeding." Ryan turned toward her sharply. "You can't just—" "We can," she said. And that was the end of that, because he understood now. legally, structurally. Everything he had been working toward was gone. He looked back at me. Really looked this time. Not as someone to charm, not as someone to manage, as someone who had outplayed him. "You knew," he said quietly. "Yes," I replied. "For how long?" "Long enough." A pause. "Then you set this up," he said. Not accusing, not angry, just realizing. "Yes," I said, and I didn't soften it, because I didn't need to. The room began to shift again. People moving, whispers starting. The event, this carefully constructed moment, was unraveling. Not dramatically, not chaotically, just ending. Lily turned to me. "Can we go?" she asked. I nodded. Of course. She didn't look back at Ryan, not once, and that was the final break. As we walked toward the exit, I felt his gaze on us, heavy, lingering, but no longer powerful, because whatever control he thought he had already slipped through his hands, long before this moment, long before he realized it. Outside, the air felt different, cooler, clearer. Lily exhaled slowly, her shoulders dropping for the first time in days. "I didn't see it," she said quietly. I didn't answer immediately, because this wasn't about blame or regret. "You do now," I said gently. She nodded, and that was enough. Behind us, the lights of the venue still glowed. The music still played faintly, the illusion of the evening continuing. But we both knew it was over. Not just the wedding, not just the relationship, the version of reality Ryan had created, the one he believed would carry him forward. It had collapsed, completely, and this time, there was no rebuilding it. As we reached the car, Lily paused. "Mom," she said softly. "Yes." "You didn't just protect the money," she said. I looked at her. "No," I replied. "I protected you." Her eyes filled with tears again, but this time they weren't from confusion or fear. They were from clarity and something else, something stronger, something that would take time to fully form, but was already there. Resilience. We got into the car, and as we drove away, neither of us looked back, because there was nothing left behind, worth returning to. In the weeks after the wedding that never happened, silence returned to my house in a way that felt different. Not empty, not heavy, just honest. For the first time in a long time, nothing in my life felt staged. No conversations carried hidden meanings. No smiles concealed something waiting underneath. The quiet wasn't something I had to fill. It was something I could finally trust. Lily moved back in with me for a while. Not because she had nowhere else to go, but because she needed space where she didn't have to pretend she was okay. The first few days were the hardest, not because she broke down constantly, because she didn't. She moved through the house carefully, as if she were adjusting to a reality that didn't quite feel solid yet. She'd start to say something, then stop, pick up her phone, then set it down again, sit in one room, then drift to another without a clear reason. Grief doesn't always look like tears. Sometimes it looks like disorientation, like learning how to exist in a life you thought you understood and suddenly don't. I didn't push her. I didn't ask her to explain anything. I just stayed, present, available, quiet. One evening, about a week after everything ended, she joined me in the kitchen while I was making tea. She leaned against the counter, watching me for a moment before speaking. "I keep replaying it," she said. I didn't look up right away. "Which part?" I asked gently. "All of it," she replied. "The things he said, the things I said, the things I didn't see." I poured the hot water slowly. "There's a difference," I said, "between not seeing something and not being shown it clearly." She frowned slightly. "I should have known," she said. I turned then, meeting her gaze. "No," I said, "you should have been able to trust the person you loved." That landed, because that's where the truth lives, not in what we miss, but in what we were never meant to question. She exhaled slowly, her shoulders dropping. "I feel embarrassed," she admitted. "Why?" I asked. "Because I let it go that far," she said, "because I defended him." I stepped closer, placing a hand lightly on her arm. "You believed in something," I said softly. "There's no shame in that." She looked at me, her eyes searching. "But there is strength," I continued, "in walking away when you finally see the truth." She nodded. Not fully convinced yet, but closer. Over time, things began to shift. Not quickly, not perfectly, but steadily. Lily started therapy not because she was broken, but because she wanted to understand how she had been drawn into something that felt real and turned out to be anything but. She asked questions, not about Ryan, about herself, about boundaries, about trust, about the difference between love and influence. And every time she came home from a session, I saw it. A little more clarity, a little more grounding, a little more of herself returning. Eventually, she asked if she could start coming into the office, not as a distraction, as a choice. "I want to understand what you built," she said one morning, "not just hear about it." I smiled. "I'd like that," I said, and I meant it, because this time she wasn't being guided. She was choosing. At work, she didn't step into anything immediately. She observed, listened, learned, the same way I once had. And slowly, she found her footing, not as my daughter, as herself, as for me. I changed too. Not dramatically, but meaningfully. For years, I had kept parts of myself quiet, my experience, my instincts, even my voice at times, not out of fear, but out of habit, out of wanting to keep things smooth, easy. But I realized someone like that again, she asked. I considered the question. "Not like that," I said. She frowned slightly. "What do you mean?" I said gently, "You won't trust someone who asks you to shrink yourself, to make them feel bigger." She was quiet for a moment. Then, "Good," she said. And I smiled. Life didn't return to what it was before. It became something else, something more honest, more intentional. Lily and I weren't just mother and daughter anymore. We were aware of each other, of ourselves, of the kind of people we allowed into our lives. One evening, months later, I found Thomas's letter again, still in the drawer, still exactly where I had placed it. I read it one more time, not because I needed to, because I wanted to, because it reminded me of something important. We don't always know when we're building protection or when we'll need it, but when the moment comes, we recognize it, and we act. As I folded the letter and placed it back in the drawer, I realized something else. Ryan had thought this was about money, about access, about control. But he was wrong. It was never about that. It was about understanding, about seeing clearly, about refusing to be small in someone else's plan. And in the end, that's what we protected. Not just what we built, but who we were and who we refused to become. Sometimes the most dangerous people in our lives are not the loud ones, not the ones who openly challenge us, but the ones who smile, who agree, who slowly guide us in directions we didn't realize we were moving. Manipulation rarely begins with control. It begins with trust, and that's why it's so hard to see. But here's the truth. Being kind does not mean being blind. Being loving does not mean being unprotected, and being trusting should never mean losing yourself. If someone truly loves you, they won't rush your decisions. They won't make you feel small for asking questions, and they will never need to hide their intentions behind words you don't understand. And if you've ever felt that quiet discomfort, that small voice telling you something isn't right, listen to it. Because that voice, it's not doubt, it's clarity, trying to reach you. I'd love to hear from you. Have you ever been in a situation where someone underestimated you or thought you wouldn't understand? What did you do? And where are you watching from? And what time is it there right now? If this story stayed with you, don't forget to subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments. Because sometimes the stories we tell are the ones that help someone else finally see their own.